Section 18. TRID, closing disclosures, and the distress transaction. The short sale is approved. Now the buyer's loan has to catch up. Ashley finally feels like David's Queen Creek transaction has momentum. The first lender has issued written short sale approval. The second lien has been addressed. The HOA issue appears manageable, and Marcus and Elena have agreed with David to the necessary contractual changes. There is only one problem. The short sale approval expires soon, and Marcus and Elena are financing the purchase. Daniel calls Ashley after speaking with the buyer's loan officer. We're getting close, but the lender still has to get the closing disclosure out correctly. David overhears the conversation and asks, "Can't they just sign everything tomorrow? My lender already approved the sale." This is where federal lending law meets the short sale timeline. TRID doesn't disappear because the seller is in trouble. TRID is the common name for the TILA-RESPA Integrated Disclosure Framework. It combines important federal mortgage disclosures and is designed to help consumers understand the costs and terms of their mortgage transaction. Earlier in the loan process, Marcus and Elena received a loan estimate. Now, as they approach consummation, the closing disclosure becomes critical. For covered transactions, Regulation Z generally requires the consumer to receive the closing disclosure no later than 3 business days before consummation. Notice the word I used, consummation. Agents sometimes say the CD has to go out 3 days before recording. That's not the precise federal rule. Under Regulation Z, consummation generally occurs when the consumer becomes contractually obligated on the credit transaction under applicable law. The practical lesson for Daniel is simple. Don't guess at the lender's federal disclosure timing. Coordinate with the lender early enough to protect the transaction deadline. A short sale approval deadline doesn't override federal law. David becomes frustrated when he hears about the waiting period. My lender says we have to close by Friday. Can't the buyers waive the 3 days? Daniel should not promise that. A short sale creditor can establish conditions for its approval, including an expiration date, but that does not give the parties permission to ignore federal mortgage disclosure requirements. This is why experienced agents work backward from the short sale approval deadline. If approval expires on a particular date, Daniel needs to communicate with Marcus and Elena's lender well before that date. Ashley needs to communicate with escrow and title. If the buyer's financing timeline appears unable to meet the short sale deadline, the parties may need to determine whether an extension can be requested from the short sale lender. Waiting until the final day to discover a timing problem is not transaction management. It's crisis management. Does every change restart the 3 days? 2 days later, Marcus calls Daniel in a panic. They changed something on my closing disclosure. Does that mean we start the 3 days all over again? Not necessarily. This is another area where agents sometimes repeat an oversimplified rule. Not every corrected closing disclosure automatically creates a new 3 business day waiting period. Under CFPB rules, a new waiting period is generally triggered by certain significant changes, including when the disclosed APR becomes inaccurate beyond applicable tolerance, the loan product changes, or a prepayment penalty is added. Other changes may require the creditor to provide a corrected closing disclosure, but they do not necessarily restart the entire waiting period. Daniel does not need to personally calculate APR tolerances. He should communicate with the lender and allow the lending professionals responsible for TRID compliance to determine the disclosure requirements. Then escrow finds a number that doesn't match, while Marcus and Elena's lender works on the closing disclosure. Maria, the escrow officer, calls Ashley. We have a problem with one of the seller side figures. The short sale approval permits a specific amount to be paid toward one transaction expense. The preliminary settlement figures show a different amount. Ashley says, "It's only a few $100s. Can't we just move it somewhere else?" Maria immediately tells her they need to resolve the discrepancy properly. That's the right response. In a short sale, the numbers appearing across the transaction documents matter. The purchase contract, short sale approval, subordinate lien approval, escrow figures, and lender disclosures need to accurately reflect the transaction. You don't solve a prohibited payment by hiding it under another label. You don't create a side payment after closing. You don't tell someone the lender will never notice. Those choices can transform a small closing problem into a serious compliance problem. The agent coordinates, the agent doesn't become the lender. Daniel is not responsible for preparing Marcus and Elena's closing disclosure. Ashley is not responsible for determining whether the creditor complied with every provision of Regulation Z. Maria isn't there to give David legal advice about deficiency liability. Everyone has a role. The agent's job is to recognize when timing or figures could affect the real estate contract, communicate with the appropriate professionals, keep their clients informed, document important developments, and involve their designated brokers when necessary. This is why experienced brokers constantly tell agents, coordinate the transaction without pretending to be every professional in the transaction. Friday morning arrives. The discrepancy is corrected. The required disclosure timing has been satisfied. Marcus and Elena's lender confirms that the loan is ready for the final closing process. David's short sale approval is still valid. Ashley finally allows herself to smile. Then Maria calls again. Before everybody celebrates, I need you to review the final settlement figures, and David needs to understand that nothing is finished until the transaction actually closes according to the required process. David laughs. How many times are you people going to tell me we're almost done? At least one more. Because signing documents isn't necessarily the same thing as completing the real estate transaction. In section 16, we'll finish chapter 4 by taking David, Marcus, and Elena through final figures, signing, funding, recording, and the last-minute problems that can still stop a distressed property closing. Online discussion 1. David's short sale approval expires soon, so he asks whether Marcus and Elena can simply ignore the federal closing disclosure waiting period. How should the agents respond? Answer. The short sale approval deadline does not override applicable federal mortgage disclosure requirements. The agents should coordinate with the buyer's lender, escrow, title, and their brokers to determine whether the transaction can satisfy both timelines. If additional time is necessary, the appropriate parties may need to address an extension of the short sale approval. 2. Marcus receives a corrected closing disclosure and assumes every change automatically creates a new 3-business-day waiting period. Is he correct? Answer. No. Not every correction automatically restarts the waiting period. Federal rules generally require a new waiting period for specified significant changes, such as certain APR changes, a change in loan product, or addition of a prepayment penalty. The buyer's lender should determine the applicable TRID requirements for the specific loan. 3. Escrow discovers that a proposed payment exceeds the amount permitted by the short sale approval. What should Ashley do? Answer. Ashley should work with escrow, her broker, and the appropriate parties to resolve the discrepancy transparently and in accordance with the contract and approval conditions. She should not hide the payment under another description or create an undisclosed side arrangement to avoid the lender's restriction.